Hi, this is my video for the skeletal system. So, bones are made up of a material called bone matrix. And this bone matrix is made of osteoid and inorganic salts. Inside the bones, there are several types of cells. One of these cells are osteoblasts. These are cells that build bone by secreting this bone matrix that I talked about. And these are a form of immature bone cells, or osteocytes. Another important cell in the bone are osteoclasts, and these are cells that cut away bone. And while this might seem counterintuitive, it is necessary to have these cells that cut away bone so that the bone can be the maximum size to balance strength and lightness, because if your bone was too heavy, you wouldn't be able to move it. So this is why you need the osteoclasts. The next type of cell are osteocytes, and these are the mature version of osteoblasts. This occurs when the osteoblasts are trapped by the bone matrix, and these osteocytes regulate the activities of the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts. The next term is osteoid, and this, as I mentioned earlier, is a component of the bone matrix. Inside the bone, you have marrow, and there's two different types of marrow. Red marrow is found in children, but as you mature, this turns into yellow marrow, and this type of marrow produces fats. So in an adult bone, you would just find yellow marrow. So looking closer into bone structure, you have the caniculi, and so the different osteocytes, if you remember, get trapped in the bone matrix, and they're sort of isolated, so they need nutrients to be able to keep being healthy cells. So the caniculi are canals that connect these osteocytes, and they allow the nutrients to flow between them. So there's different canals, but the central canal, this is the central part of an osteon. And an osteon in the bone matrix are these concentric rings that form around the central blood vessel. So you have the central blood vessel that provides nutrients, and then you have concentric rings around it. And then this form of these concentric rings is called the circumferential lamellae, and these allow the bones to grow in width. Then there's the diaphysis, and this is the central part of a large bone, and this is what contains the medullary cavity. And this is the medullary cavity is the central cavity of the bone, and this is where the yellow and red bone marrow that I talked about before are stored. And in the medullary cavity, there's the endosteum, which is a type of connective tissue that lines the surface, and it forms the medullary cavity. Then another part of the bone is the epiphyseal line. When you're growing, there's a gap of hyaline cartilage that's left in the bone that allows the bone to grow more. So this is like where your growth plate would be, but as you mature and stop growing, this gap of hyaline cartilage fuses, so you can't grow anymore, and it just forms a line where there used to be the gap. Then there's the epiphysis, and this is the rounded end of long bone, and this is the part of the bone that contains more spongy bone. And then, in addition to the circumferential lamellae in the osteon, there's the interstitial lamellae, and these are the remnants of the osteon and circumferential lamellae that are left around the bone. And as I said earlier, the osteoblasts are trapped into the bone matrix, and they're actually trapped in these areas called lacunae, which are little crevices that house these osteoblasts. And then besides the central canal that goes in the center of the osteon, there are things called perforation canals, and these are branches between central canals that help connect everything. And then looking more to the outside of the bone, there's the periosteum. This is a connective tissue that covers the outside of the bone to protect it, and it's dense, irregular, which allows it to withstand force, and it also allows it to be an anchor to muscles. And osteoblasts and osteoclasts are contained in the blood vessels in the center of the bone, but they're also contained in this periosteum. Then the next term is trabeculae, and this is what composes the spongy bone, and this spongy bone is able to mold to forces that you experience. So if you do a specific type of workout for a long period of time, this trabecular bone will mold to adapt and shift over time, which allows it to be an integral part of our bones. Then there's different types of bones. There's flat bones, and their major purpose is protection. And an example of this would be the skull. Then there's irregular bone, and this protects nervous tissues, and it's an anchor for skeletal muscle attachment. And then there's long bone. These are hard, dense bones, and their purpose is to provide strength, structure, and mobility. An example would be your femur, and the main definition of it is that the length is greater than the width. Short bones, however, are more of a cube shape in that their length and width are roughly the same. And so they still provide support and stability, but not as much motility as the long bones. And so an example of this would be the patella. So there are, the human body is made up of tons of bones, but the bones that we have here are categorized into different regions of the body. So for the skull, the skull is made up of the frontal bone, the parietal bone, the temporal bone, the occipital bone, and the ethmoid bone. And then the facial bones, there's the maxilla, the zygomatic bone, the palatine bone, the lacrimal bone, the inferior nasal conchae, the vomer, the mandible, the hyoid bone, and the nasal bone. And then in the vertical column, which is like your spine, there are several types of vertebrae. There's the cervical vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae, the thoracic vertebrae, and then the coccyx, which is at the very bottom of the spine. And then in your shoulder girdle, you have the scapulae and clavicle that make up the shoulder. In your upper limbs, the top part of your arm, you have the humerus, and then forming your forearm, you have the radius and the ulna. And then your hands are made up of tons of bones. There's the carpals and metacarpals, capitate bone, hamate bone, lunate bone, navicular bone, trapezium, trapezoid bone, and triquestral bone. And all of these bones work together to make up your hand. And then the pelvic girdle is made up of a bone called the coxal bone. And then in your lower limbs, the top part of your limb, I think the largest bone in your body is the femur. But then the bottom part of your leg, there's the tibia and fibula. And your feet, just like your hands, are made up of a ton of bones. There's the metatarsals, cuboid bone, calcaneus, intermediate cuneiform bone, lateral cuneiform bone, medial cuneiform bone. And then the last category, a couple of bones were from the ear, and I didn't really know if these would go in another category, so I just categorized them as the ear. And so in the ear, there was the lunate bone and the incus. Okay, that's it for the skeletal system.